Do not get in his way, as he will devour your soul if you dare attempt to stop him, as he is the Deadrock Enderman. And this is the story. It all begins on one ordinary day within the distant Outer End Islands, and everything seemed to be normal, as the Endermen were mindlessly wandering across the world. The shulkers were defending the end cities, and the chorus plants were growing. So, all was good. Until, all of a sudden, when a wave of red corruption struck the surface of the world. Now, luckily, the God of the End, otherwise known as the End Spirit, was quick to act on this, and so he was then able to limit the spread of that corruption and kill the wave right then and there on the spot. And so, just a few seconds later, everything could go back to normal. Except, no, as while most of the End's inhabitants were unaffected by that evil wave of corruption and were just able to move on with their lives, there was one Enderman whose life would never be the same again. As that Enderman was standing on the bedrock frame of an end gateway at the time of that corruption's arrival. And well, due to that wave of corruption, he glitched through that bedrock frame, but because the End Spirit was so quick to act against that wave, the corruption that he was enduring suddenly stopped. And so, that meant that he was partially stuck inside that block of bedrock. This was wrong, as no being was meant to be inside of any block, let alone bedrock. And so, this malfunction caused the bedrock to start shaking, and the Enderman began to glow, as this was all an error, and should have never happened. And so, it only took a few seconds when the bedrock fused into that Enderman. And so with that, the world was balanced, and all was good once again. Except, not quite, as the Enderman was about to go through a number of changes, as that bedrock that he had just fused with was starting to cover his body, as well as that his blood began to harden and his vision narrowed. Also, his teleportation powers had just been heightened to the extreme. But those were just the physical changes, and none of those would be the greatest change that he would endure. No, as the biggest change that he endured due to that bedrock was the altering of his mind, as it was at that moment that he suddenly gained a craving for bedrock, almost as if it was a food and he was starving for it. And so, to satisfy this desire for bedrock, he looked up at the rest of that gateway, and he swiftly teleported onto it, where he then began to hit that bedrock over and over and over again. Now, from an outside perspective, this just looked ridiculous, as no one could break bedrock, and so he was just wasting his time. However, that fusion that he had just undergone also included the ability to break and digest bedrock. And so, after 3 strong swings by that Enderman, he was able to break that bedrock, and then he ate it. But that wasn't enough. He wanted more, and so he broke and ate all other pieces of bedrock that were connected to that gateway. But still, that wasn't enough. He craved even more of it. And so, with that, he then began to teleport across the end, all on the search for more bedrock for him to consume. And well, things were going quite successfully, as over the next few hours, he was able to digest hundreds of blocks of bedrock. But again, it wasn't enough, as he craved even more of it. But by this time, he was starting to encounter a slight issue. That being, the other Endermen were starting to get in his way, preventing him from achieving his goal of consuming as much bedrock as he possibly could. And so, for that reason, he made the decision to kill any Enderman right there on the spot if any of them ever dared to get in his way. But even though this was a ruthless strategy, he wasn't done yet, as in order to send a message to all other Endermen that they were not to get in his way, he would make sure to devour the bodies of every single Enderman that he killed, and he would drink their blood. And so, it was a gruesome sight to behold, and all the Endermen throughout the end were terrified of him. And so, over the next few decades, this bedrock-obsessed Enderman travelled the end, consuming millions of bedrock blocks and killing thousands of Endermen. But, also, over that time, he began to evolve, as his diet had switched from just eating chorus plants to bedrock blocks and the blood of the Enderman. And so, for that reason, his mouth began to grow quite dramatically, and he grew several strong teeth infused with bedrock. And both of these adaptations allowed for not only greater consumption of bedrock and blood, but also made him far more threatening to all of the end, as those teeth were strong. So strong, in fact, that he could break a bedrock block with just one bite. And he could kill an Enderman in just one bite. And so, he was a monster. But not just that, due to all those Endermen that he had killed, he gained a bloody appearance, and so that made him appear even more gruesome and terrifying. Additionally, due to all that bedrock that he consumed, he developed a resistance against all attacks on a level of strength unlike any other, as all that bedrock that he consumed was fused into his soul and physical form, thus allowing him to obtain resistance 1,000,000. And so, he was effectively unkillable. Also, most importantly, his final adaptation was that he subscribed. And so, all was going very well for him, as all the Endermen were staying far away from him, and his bedrock collection was at maximum efficiency. And so, because of both of those factors, he was able to gather more bedrock than any entity ever had in the history of the entire Minecraft universe. But still, he was greedy, and he needed more. And very lucky for him, he was just about to witness an opportunity of a lifetime. As while he was just travelling across the end, fulfilling his desires for bedrock consumption, he saw it. It was this strange villager-like being, and it was teleporting across the end. Now, that Enderman was just in complete shock by that being, as he had never seen anything like that before this moment. And so, rather curious, he wanted to know who this being was and why they were here. And so, for that reason, he began to stalk that villager to try and find the answers. Now, normally, he wouldn't have done that, but that villager just radiated an aura that was unlike anything he had ever felt from any other being. And well, this curiosity was enough to temporarily stop his cravings for bedrock. Well, sort of. As he quickly found out what was causing that aura for that villager. Because after a few hours of stalking that villager, he realized that the aura that he was sensing was actually the scent of delicious bedrock. Because that villager was not from this world. No, rather he originated from a completely different realm. And that world that he had originated from, well, it had far more bedrock than he had consumed at this point here in the end. And so that Enderman was rather intrigued by this, and he was desperate to find out where that world was. And again, very luckily for him, he was about to. As, while stalking that villager over the next few days, he found out that he was actually trying to go to his homeworld and was recruiting other Endermen to help him achieve that mission. This was great, as all he had to do now in order to get to that world was to just follow them. And so, it was only a few weeks after that the villager, along with those other Endermen, were boarding a flying ship, and they were preparing to set off to this other world. And so, seeing his opportunity, the Enderman came out of the shadows, and he ran to secretly hide out on the hull of that boat. And then, just a few minutes later, they set off. Yes, this was it. He was going to get just so much bedrock. However, he quickly realized that this boat was going fast. Too fast, in fact, as that boat was going at almost light speed. And well, as he was just standing on the edge of that block, he was very close to falling off it and losing his opportunity to get to that other world. However, despite that fact, he remained standing on that boat as he was just so determined to get that bedrock, and nothing was going to stop him. And so, through pure willpower and resilience, he was able to hold on with his full might until, finally, after what seemed like years had passed, they arrived in that other world at last. Yes, this was it. He could smell all that bedrock, and he loved it. And so before that boat even landed, he jumped off, and he teleported away. Then, when he landed on the surface, he looked around, trying to smell the bedrock so that he could learn where it was. And well, very quickly, he realized that it was stored deep below the surface. And so, with that, he then began to dig straight down. And well, using his sharp teeth and large bedrock-plated fists, he was able to do that in just a mere few seconds. And then, when he arrived at the bottom of his world, he was just amazed with what he saw, as there was just so much bedrock here. In fact, the entirety of the floor within this world was made from bedrock. He just couldn't believe it, as he had never seen so much bedrock in one place before, and he just couldn't wait to start devouring this delicious rock. However, before he would do that, he heard a loud crash. Now, he was going to investigate, but at the same time, he just didn't care enough, as he just wanted to get on and begin consuming this bedrock, as after all, he had been waiting long enough for this moment. And so, over the next few days, the Enderman devoured millions of bedrock pieces, leaving a trail of the void behind him as he went across the world. And he loved every single second of this moment, as no matter how much he ate, there was always more to consume. It was glorious, but still, his desire for bedrock hadn't been satisfied just yet. And so, over the next few centuries, the Enderman spent every single day of his life devouring that bedrock like a savage, never leaving the underground for even a second, as he just loved the taste of that bedrock, and nothing else was more important to him than eating it. But because of that, he, once again, began to evolve, but this time in a much more peculiar way, as his body began to adapt to no longer have eyes, because he just no longer needed them, as after all, he was in a very dark environment, and having eyesight down there served almost no purpose. As after all, he could just smell the bedrock all around him, and he knew what he was doing, and he didn't have any plans for doing anything else for the rest of his life. And so, for him, vision was useless, and so, in place of his eyes, came swirls of dark emptiness. Now, that might sound like a bad thing, but it really wasn't, as due to the loss in sight, his other senses were heightened to the extreme, and so now he could smell the bedrock even more potently, and he could feel the rock-hard surface of the bedrock with even more detail. Also, he could hear the entities that were going to be in his way from hundreds, if not thousands, of blocks away. And so, for that reason, he could just let out a loud, threatening roar whenever he heard them. And so, with that, all those entities would be scared away, and thus he would be able to continue his quest of bedrock collection without issue and with greater efficiency. But still, without eyes, he just looked dead, both physically and mentally, as his addiction to collecting bedrock had removed any other form of enjoyment out of his life, as there was just nothing else that he did besides collecting bedrock by this time. And so, for that reason, from that moment onwards, he became known in legends as the Deadrock Enderman. But still, all was going quite well, as his bedrock collection process was at all-time peaks with efficiency, as the Deadrock Enderman was able to collect more bedrock than ever before. And it didn't look like anything could possibly stop him. Well, that was until one day when everything would change, as it was on that day while the Deadrock Enderman was continuing to feel his desire for consumption of bedrock deep within the Minecraft underground, that a player somehow stumbled across the remains of his bedrock quarry. Now, that player was shocked to see this, as this was clearly unnatural. And so, that player just stood there for a while, terrified with what he was seeing, and thinking if he should investigate this or not, as whatever or whoever did this could likely annihilate him from the surface of the world. But despite that, he was curious and he wanted to learn the truth. And so that player foolishly decided, why not, and began to build a bridge across the void in an attempt to find the being that did this. Now, the Deadrock Enderman could hear that player slowly making his way towards him. And so, just as usual, he let out a loud roar in an attempt to scare him away. But that player, even though he was absolutely terrified of that sound, he ignored it as he continued to head deeper into that cave. Now, the Deadrock Enderman was curious to know why he didn't stop, as no other entity had ever dared to defy his roar. And well, as that player was getting closer and closer and closer, the Deadrock Enderman was starting to detect an aura from this being that was unlike anything that he had encountered so far. And so, for that reason, he stopped consuming that bedrock and he teleported behind that player, where he then began to stalk him, listening for his every move, attempting to visualize him by his mere scent and movement. Now, that player was very confused as to why this tunnel went on for so long, and he just had no idea how so much bedrock could be destroyed, leading down to the void. But eventually, after spending hours creating that bridge, he just stopped, as he began to feel very uneasy, as he felt that he was being watched. But after a few minutes of just standing there, looking around to see if he could find the being that was watching him, he just decided to carry on, as he just assumed that he was being paranoid. And he was able to bridge out another 1,000 blocks when he saw it. Now, it was only a glimpse, but he saw the Deadrock Enderman, and he was horrified, and so he began to run away, screaming in fear, as he just had no idea what he was, and he didn't want to find out. Now, the Deadrock Enderman could have just left it as that, as with him being alone now, he could just continue devouring that bedrock. However, he just really needed to know what that aura from that player was. And so, for that reason, knowing that he had been spotted, he teleported in front of that player and he began to charge at him. Oh no, this was it. That player was convinced that he was going to die now. And so he began to crawl away, crying and begging for his life as he was preparing for death. Now, the Deadrock Enderman could clearly see the opportunity to strike him down and devour his soul. But it just wasn't worth the time, as he could finally see that this being had nothing of value, and that aura that he sensed, well, it was just fake courage, and no other being was so foolish to present themselves as he did. And so, the Deadrock Enderman just teleported away and returned to his mission of bedrock consumption. And all was good for the next few days, until he sensed it. It was the scent of bedrock, but this time it was more potent than any other. In fact, it was more potent than the bedrock around him, and he could sense that it was coming from the end. And well, as the Deadrock Enderman had such powerful teleportation powers, and he knew the location of the end relative to this world, he was able to teleport over to the end in just a mere few seconds. And well, as soon as he stepped foot onto the end, he could smell it even more potently now. However, he quickly realized something. This scent was not coming from the end. No, instead, it was coming from this other world that was just passing by the end, and it was extremely close. And so, the Deadrock Enderman, using his teleportation powers, was able to open up a portal connecting the two worlds that would allow him to teleport between the two. And so, with that, he jumped right into it. And well, as soon as he landed on the surface of the other world, he saw that all life there was dead. But that didn't matter to him, as he could smell it. More bedrock than even the overworld was here. This was amazing, as when he just dug down a few blocks, he saw it. Thousands of layers of bedrock. This was amazing. And so, very excitedly, he began to devour it all. However, little did he know, there was a life form on that land, and that life form could fly, and so it was able to get through that portal before it disappeared. And so that creature escaped that dead world and was teleported over to the end. And that creature, when it arrived on the surface of the end, well, actually, to learn the tragic tale of what happened next, you'll need to watch this video.